CNN's Bryn Gingras is live outside the courthouse on Long Island. Bryn, what are you hearing?
Yeah, we're just hearing, John, that George Santos is in custody and this indictment has been unsealed. I want to give you some quick details as we're going through the paperwork. He is charged on a 13-count indictment. According to those court documents, the charges include 7 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of money laundering, 1 count of theft of public funds, and 2 counts of making materially false statements to the House of Representatives. Again, we're just getting this indictment. It has just been unsealed. We're hearing that Santos is inside the federal courthouse here behind me, and he has been arrested on these charges. And of course, we're learning that he will see a judge later today, very likely on these charges, but we are still going through that paperwork to get the details of these counts. Again, though, 13-count indictment just unsealed, including wire fraud, money laundering, theft of public funds, and 2 counts of making materially false statements to the House of Representatives.
Just look that up.
All right, Bryn Gingras for us outside the courthouse. Bryn, thank you very much. We'll let you dig through this indictment more as more details become public. Thank you very much.
Indicted, now it is unsealed, and now he is in custody. Wire fraud, LA money laundering, theft of public funds. What do you make of that?
So we have not seen the actual indictment yet, but based on that description from Bryn, let's sort of run through generally what these statutes are. Wire fraud is a very broadly used statute that basically says to steal anything from anybody by lying to them. The wire part just means you did it over the internet or the phone, something that's always going to apply. Excuse me. So this is going to apply to some sort of fraud whereby George Santos presumably took money from somebody else by lying to them. Then we have money laundering. Now that means taking the proceeds, the money that you stole, and hiding it somehow, trying to conceal it from investigators. Then we have theft of public funds. Now that's interesting. That means not only did he steal money from some private individual, but it would have to be some sort of public money, some sort of federal or state governmental money. So I'm interested to see what that is about. And then finally, making materially false statements to the House of Representatives. This is what we were talking about, I think, before, Sarah, that you have to make certain campaign-related disclosures to the House. Of course, lying to the House, whether during verbal testimony or in documents that you file, that too is a federal crime.
So I was just sort of looking at this up, and that money laundering is, you can get up to 20 years. I mean, these charges are very serious and hold a lot of time potentially if he's convicted.
They are very serious. Most of these charges are going to carry 20-year maximums. Now, we have to be careful whenever we talk about these maximums because it's very rare, putting aside your murder type cases, it's very rare that anyone gets the maximum or anything near it. But ultimately, this looks to me like it's not all based on one thing. This isn't all about one transaction or one fraud.
And not based on his resume.
No,
not
absolutely
the salacious lies of his resume that we were first introduced to George Santos with.
None of this has to do with him claiming what his background is, his heritage is, his family is, his resume. Now, prosecutors ultimately might try to introduce that at a trial to support some of these other charges. But no, this looks like, again, based on the charges, a sort of, well, it's atypical because it involves a member of Congress, but in some respects, a standard fraud and false statements case.
Ellie Honig, stand by for a minute. We have our justice correspondent, Evan Perez, with us somewhere. I will look and find him. Evan, there you are. Evan, look, it strikes me, by the way, also, there are financial crimes here alleged, which generally means paper trail, records, cases that are tough for a defendant. Talk to me about the breadth of the charges here.
Well, John, look, I mean, the fact is that this is a congressman who's only been in office for 4 or 5 months, and there's been just a stunning number of allegations of frauds and lies that he's been facing and under scrutiny for, and it's clear, and this is something that we heard repeatedly during the investigation. The FBI and prosecutors knew that there was going to be plenty to work with here. They knew that there was a lot of paperwork. Every one of these things that he filed with a government agency was potentially a crime. And the fact that it took this long, I think some members of Congress yesterday were remarking that I'm surprised it took this long. Well, part of the reason was that they kept finding new things to investigate. And again, what you see here in this indictment is just the basics that what the Justice Department, what the FBI really, it's their bread and butter, which is to look at some of the financial statements that he's made, some of the things that he did to raise money, according to the indictment, which were fraudulent. And so those are the things that, as you pointed out, are very difficult for a defendant to defend themselves against, because either you filed the paperwork and it was false, or you didn't. And we know you filed it because we have it. So that's part of the problem here for the congressman. And we'll see, whether he decides to go to trial, or whether there's a way for him to figure out a way to make a deal, as he did with Brazilian authorities just a few weeks ago, where he admitted to a fraud there in Brazil from several years ago, in order to avoid having to go back and face a trial there. So again, we're still reading through the indictment, 20 pages or so, to see what exactly he's accused of here. But again, so much that the FBI had to work with over the last few months.
Evan, stick with us if you will. I want to go to Caitlin Polance as well. Caitlin's joining us in Washington. Caitlin, talk to us a little bit more about one of the big questions all along has been also violations of campaign finance laws. What are you picking up on that?
Right. Well, this is a really meaty indictment. I'm still going through it. But even at the top, whenever you're looking at it, the thing that jumps out is that the federal prosecutors were able to discover political contributions that did not go to George Santos's political candidacy. So they say in this indictment that September and October in 2022, so not that long ago, he was taking in money that was supposed to be used to his candidacy into a company, but that was a false pretense. Instead, it was going to things like luxury designer clothing and credit card payments for personal expenses. He was soliciting it for personal expenses. And so that's a pretty meaty charge on its own. There are other violations here related to his political life. There are campaign finance violations that are outlined here. There are also violations relating to what he was telling the House about his own employment, about the money he had. But even that, we don't get a lot of more specifics than the luxury designer clothing credit card payment detail here in this indictment. But it really is on its own just an astonishing thing that he was taking in money from political donors, and it was going to, not that, it was going to benefit George Santos himself, apparently, based on what we're reading so far.
Caitlin Polance, keep reading. You've got the paper copy right now. Please dig in more. Fill us in when you get this new information. Ellie Honig, based on what you just heard from Caitlin Polance, what gives?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So the idea here is the fraud is, he said, okay, people who support me politically, donate to my campaign and I will use it to buy yard signs and ads and win a seat in Congress. Instead, according to Caitlin's reading of the indictment, he basically pocketed that money and he used it for his own personal expenses, which you cannot do.
And this
that
is
a
after
fraud.
he's under scrutiny. This isn't pre-election. This is after he was already under scrutiny, according to what Caitlin just said, October, September of 2022.
2022 is right. That just happened. Yeah. So that's, he was up for election in, I guess, November of 2022. So it would have absolutely overlapped with the election itself.
This is, I hesitate to use this term, but I can't think of one better on the moment. This is JV stuff when you're raising money in a campaign. The one thing you know when you raise money for a campaign is you can't spend campaign money on personal stuff.
Yeah, it's remarkably, in some sense, unsophisticated. I mean, we've seen politicians over the years sort of in more sophisticated ways, launder money, maybe that'll come into play here, but use it in ways where maybe it's arguable, is this a campaign expense, is this a personal expense? But the things that Caitlin just laid out, that are laid out in the indictment, are seemingly undoubtedly personal expenses. So if prosecutors can prove that, and by the way, prosecutors are going to be very careful before they bring a charge against a sitting member of Congress. So if they can prove that, then that'll make out the wire fraud claims.
And you made the point that this has happened fairly fast. So the evidence, they have to have it in order to go forward with this, obviously. They've got paperwork, and we will have to see. We do have something now coming out from the court. Bryn Gingras is joining us now live. She's got an update for us, a statement, I understand, from the DOJ?
Yeah, that's right, Sarah. We learned that the grand jury returned this indictment yesterday, and now we have this 13-count indictment, a statement. I want to read it in full to you. It's quite long. It says, this indictment seeks to hold Santos accountable for various alleged fraudulent schemes and brazen misrepresentations. Taken together, the allegations in the indictment charge Santos with relying on repeated dishonesty and deception to ascend to the halls of Congress and enrich himself. He used political contributions to line his pockets, unlawfully applied for unemployment benefits that should have gone to New Yorkers who had lost their jobs due to the pandemic, and lied to the House of Representatives. My office and our law enforcement partners will continue to aggressively root out corruption and self-dealing from our community's public institutions and hold public officials accountable to the constituents who elected them. And of course, he went into office just in January, but we know that the investigations into him were before that. My colleague Mark Morales is learning from sources that Santos actually turned himself into the FBI office in Melville, New York, and was then taken here to the federal courthouse, and that's why we didn't actually see him drive up and go in. But he is in custody right now. We do expect him to go before a judge on these 13 charges. It's unclear of that timing as of now, but a pretty strong statement there from the DOJ.